You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to The Authenticity Show wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on social media. This episode is about creativity. What is creativity? What makes art art? And what about creativity in healing, or the healing arts? Also, we talk a little bit about Burning Man, and Carlos breaks down the idea of perceptual positions, which sounds kind of dry and boring, but which is actually really fascinating and very useful in everyday life. So let's get going.
So Carlos, you were preparing for a presentation that you gave, and you and I were talking about your plans on the phone the other day, and I really liked some of the things that we had talked about, and I liked some of your ideas about how you were going to present some issues around the ideas of creativity, specifically when creativity can start to get to the point where it starts to feel like a loss, like you're not, like sort of like you're, you create something and then it goes nowhere, and there's a disappointment in that, And anyways, it got me thinking about the different faces of creativity, right?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of having your heart set on somebody who rejects you or isn't interested,
Yeah.
or, something that seems like it is mutual, and then you find out that maybe they don't feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you do with all that buildup, all that energy, everything that you've thought about doing with them, and all the things you wanted to share with them, and your memories of all the things that you've built with them up to that point? There becomes a mismatch between what you are holding inside of your consciousness, what your mind is, and then there's this external reality, which seems to be, at a huge difference with your inner picture. So for a creative to spend months and months and months, or lots of labor, sweat, tears, blood, money, mobilizing things to move mountains, as it were, and then to have the people who you would ultimately be selling it to, or who would give it the A-OK or the, sorry, those people can sometimes also be like that lover that rejects you, because then all that energy that you put into that project is now seemingly going down the drain.
Yeah, it's kind of like creativity by itself is this pure, beautiful thing, but then we start to infuse hope into it.
Yeah.
And the hope can kind of make the creativity or the thing that you're creating become something else than what it originally was supposed to be, And I'm getting pictures of, artists like Vincent van Gogh, right? Mm-hmm. Who created this stuff, created these pieces and kept meeting disappointment for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. And it's only later that people appreciate what he did, right? But what is it about that quality that is sort of a prerequisite for art, where you're supposed to do the art simply for the sake of the art? And if you have some intentions behind it, like to sell a piece and to make money or to become famous, then somehow it's tainted. It's kind of a theme in the artistic world to talk about that.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the motto for, 20th Century Fox is Ars Gratia Artis. And in Latin, that means art for the sake of art.
Yeah.
And I think it's either that or MGM. I can't remember which major movie house it was, but it's been their motto for a long time. So at the beginning of those old black and white movies, you'd see, that little Latin phrase. Mm-hmm. And for a religious person, that sounds blasphemous. you can't make art for the sake of art. It has to be for the divine.
Mm.
But then when we think of Hollywood, it doesn't usually cause us to picture divine things. We think about money. We think about commercialism. We think about gratuitous sex and violence. We think about, mindless stuff. And then also the things that pull us out and bring us into another reality, the things that we like, that are the genres and the examples that pull us into another world. And we like that. But there is this other side. There's the commercial side of it, which is huge, really. And that side of it, for those of us who are appreciating the art, I think most of us would recoil in disgust.
Yeah.
Just seeing what goes on to make a film, to promote a film, and to, as it goes through the test of time and all the changes it goes through after that.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of come to the conclusion that there's all these outside forces that are trying to ruin the art.
Yeah.
Micromanage the art.
Yeah.
Put a timeline on that art. Like that, this album better be done by fall, or whatever the executives, are demanding, and how many bands broke up because of the business side of art, right? So it's an interesting thing to look at because there's art that is successful, right? And then that implies that there is art that is unsuccessful. Yet, art isn't supposed to be unsuccessful. It's supposed to be itself. It's supposed to be art.
It's expression.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a fun topic for you and I to jump into because what we do a lot of creative things, right? This show, for example, right? We always say this show for us is art, right? Don't we always say that?
Yep.
And that usually comes up when somebody says, "Hey, you making any money off the show?" It's like, well, we're not closed to making money off the show, but the show is art for us, and we just keep doing shows because we just enjoy doing this,
Yeah, and it isn't always like the measure of whether or not your art is quote unquote good or bad. And I think if the focus is on being good, the idea is that it's good for someone else rather than inherently good.
Yes.
But there's a little bit of a confusion in that because people mix the idea of it being inherently good or intrinsically good versus getting the recognition of other people. That other recognition can become posthumous. It can be while you're doing it or not happen at all. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the quality is bad or that the ideas were not interesting. I mean, just today I was on a I guess you could say a rally of sorts for a very large Fortune 500 company that I was doing like a motivational talk for. And the person right before me was showing all of these projects that he did over the course of time from the very early days in his dip into advertising, from art to advertising and advertising to marketing and all that, and how his progression was over time. He had saved a lot of these projects, and so he created this whole presentation. It's just very interesting to see how many really good ideas didn't go anywhere because it didn't have the traction with the people listening. They said things like, "Oh, they're not ready for this," or "It's too subtle," or there's just a lot of nuance in that, and our audience isn't going to appreciate it. And the rest of us who were watching the presentation were just very wowed. We're like, "This is profound."
Yeah.
Why didn't this take?
Why didn't it take off? Yeah.
So being able to create for the sake of creating, or to do art for the sake of art, means having that mindset at the outset. Because if you don't, if you're confused and you think that your art is only valuable if other people value it, then you're likely to shift your motivation. I'm not saying you can't produce really, really amazing things for money. Some people are really good at that, and they have a knack for feeling what people want to hear or see or experience. that's its own skill. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're a better artist.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Well, I think, business, for example, business is business. And so the end goal of business is to come out with some kind of gains, right? Gains that will give you some kind of resource that will be valuable in your life, right? And in art, I think it's really helpful to start with this idea that there's no goal at all, right? There's no goal to art. Now, I know some people are going, yeah, but when, hold on. Go into it with this idea that there's nothing to be gained from it, right? It's just going to happen, right? Like, for example, today, my body and your body produced all kinds of skin cells and heart cells and liver cells, and we made all kinds of hormones and all this, and we didn't get any awards, and nobody's watching, and we're not comparing how many testosterone particles did you make today, right? We don't get together and compare. Our bodies just make these things because they make these things, right? And it does end up leading to something, right? But it just kind of needs to happen on its own, right? And I'm sort of wondering, like, how many amazing trees or flowers are out there way deep in the woods that no human has ever seen, right? Are those flowers and trees wasted because we didn't see them? Yeah, we didn't see them. So are they wasted? So anyway, yeah.
If a tree isn't appreciated in the woods, does it exist?
Yeah, right. Or is it art?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not art. Maybe it's just a tree, right? If we don't smell the fragrance of the rose,
Yeah, well, where this can come into play, and I kind of was speaking about this earlier, is that if you have creative people who then also do this for a living, and their thing doesn't go through, their motivation has been sapped, the wind is out of their sails, and they end up feeling. Often they report it. It's like, I'm stuck, or I have like a block, or I don't have anything more. I've given my all.
Yeah.
As if there's an end to the creative force. There isn't, in my opinion. It's more of it's a state.
Yeah.
It's a state of flow.
Yeah.
And if you happen to have that state of flow developed as an artist, then that is one of the ways in which that flow will happen. But it is state dependent. And I think people don't often look or introspect to find out what that state is. And so they're kind of keeping their attention on things that might not be leading them to help, become more creative. It's what they're doing to survive. And not to diminish the importance of that, because you have to survive. But if your survival depends on being creative, then you need to really isolate what it is that is that creativity. Where does that creativity stem from? How do you get into the state where you are creating?
Yeah. I think, here's part of my answer for that, right? How do you get into that state where you are creating? And something that helps me at times, if I'm in a situation where I sit down and I'm supposed to be creating something, maybe I'm creating something for work, or maybe I just have an itch to sit down and create something, I don't know, write a poem or something like that. If I feel blocked, if I feel uninspired, if I feel like I'm not coming up with anything, one of the things that's helpful for me is to do this, right? And I'll just sort of do it right now. Is like I'll kind of just freeze, and I'll close my eyes, and I'll feel my body, and I'll listen to everything around me, and I just take a minute and realize that I myself am the process of creation happening, right? Because if you're alive and you're sitting in a body and you're thinking, then you are part of you are part of the universe that has been created. You're continuously creating yourself. So stop trying to create and just realize that you are participating in creation itself. and you could just go to sleep and take a nap, and you're still part of creation, you know? And so that sometimes helps me if I'm feeling like I'm not producing.
So you become very, very present. You attend to your present awareness with the presupposition that you are part of a creative process already.
Yeah.
That you're an inexorable sort of participant in that. You are creation, and you are creating, and then somehow allowing that to exist in your consciousness in the background somehow maybe stimulates you to trust your flow, and you tap into something. Maybe you follow an idea, you get an urge, or you get a compulsion to see something, and then you do it, and then the end result is that creative thing, whether it's a line of poetry or a drawing or a few notes on a guitar.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I think sometimes when we start to get into our internal dialogue, and we say things like, or we often hear this from people, right? I'm not very creative, or I'm not the creative type.
Yeah.
And I think, hold on, just acknowledge for a second that you are creation itself. So just lean on that for a minute and relax into that, and let that kind of recalibrate where you're coming from. And then it almost becomes inevitable that you're about to create something, because how could you are the wellspring of creation in a sense.
Well, and real tangibly, I mean, you just telling me that you're not creative has created an idea in my head, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't there before you said it.
There you go. Yeah. We made something.
I couldn't have thought of it because I wasn't, that didn't cross my mind at all.
Yeah.
I thought you were creative. So you even saying that, so in NLP we say you cannot not communicate.
That's great. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. You cannot not
It's a double negative, but it's true.
Yeah.
Everything is a communication, including silence.
Totally. Yeah.
So it's not a question of whether you are a creative.
Yeah. Carlos, I'm looking at your eyes right now. Nice color. Did you make that yourself?
I did.
Beautiful. Yeah. I noticed you went with kind of the more black pigment in your hair. I went with more with the brown. Yeah. You like how I did that?
I did.
Yeah. I did that myself.
It's very specific to you as well.
Yeah, it is. It's very neat. I take up space in a very particular shape, right? And you take up space in a very particular shape, and the two shapes are similar, but not to be confused with one another, right?
Nope.
And we did that ourselves, and nobody even had to give us any lessons. We just did it.
We're unconsciously competent.
Yeah. Right.
At being us.
Yeah. And for anybody listening to this, they won't be able to see what I'm about to point to, but on the video, we're in a room in my home, and we had this little tapestry, which was, but by the way, this is the tree of life. And I'll tell you what I love about this little piece of art is, if you look at each individual piece, it's not very good. Right? I'm like, there's birds and there's flowers and there's leaves, and it's like some of those are some pretty poor looking birds. Right? Like I look at it and I'm like, those flowers are so simple. It's the tree of life. And this was like $10 or something on Amazon that I got. And I look at all these individual pieces, and none of the drawings are particularly that great, but yet you put it all together and it's kind of phenomenal.
It is.
And I think the lesson there is when you keep creating, as you step back from it and look at it with some space, it actually always starts to come together.
Do your work and walk away.
Yeah.
Doubtaging 101, right?
Yeah.
Do the work and walk away. Take no credit.
Yeah.
You do things for their own sake, for the intrinsic value of it, rather than bargaining with something else in your mind or with someone else.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the Tai Chi teacher that we had that said, don't try to be good. Don't try to make your teacher happy. Just ask the question, what is Tai Chi?
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful.
As you're practicing. So, if you're creating art, then we're really all pointing towards this thing, this quality. It's not a thing. This quality of feeling creative, of doing creative things, of sensing a creative flow and expressing that creativity. Whatever that is, that's a state.
Yeah.
And trusting that the state itself is all that you need in order to feel driven to create.
Yeah, well said. Well
you know
said.
what I mean? It's circular in its logic, but it's true because if you feel like you gravitate towards wanting to create things and you have begun to hone a skill like drawing or music or writing or dance or whatever it may be, then you've already carved that pathway and you will feel ebbs and flow in the pulse, the rhythm of life, right, moving through you that causes you to want to create. There'll be moments when you don't feel like creating. But it's not really dependent on outside things. It's something else that each artist has to discover for themselves. But the quickest way is to continue to realize that you can literally create for its own sake, just to be creative.
Yeah.
And anything else, any other motivation is unrelated to creating. It might be related to making money. It might be related to having fame. It might be related to, some other thing, but it's not the creation. So can you be authentic as you move forward and, be the artist that you are and still make a good living, focus on, putting a roof over your head and all the things that need to happen? Does it automatically mean that you have to lose your authenticity just because you're making a lot of money for something?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
It's not connected.
So something I remember from watching Game of Thrones, something that Tyrion Lannister had said to a young Jon Snow. He was talking about, it was the scene where they first met and he kept referring to him as Bastard. And he said something along the lines of, always remember who you are, bastard, and nobody can use it against you. And if we are creating something, even creating your own little life, as boring as it might seem, right? Remember that you're creating your boring little life. I create boredom all the time. I'm really good at creating boredom. Remember who you are. You are the one creating that, and that can never be used against you. And as soon as we forget that we are the one creating the things in our lives, funny enough, not only can others use it against us, but we start using it against ourselves. And we do that all the time, Oh, my idea's fizzling out and I'm not making money. Or I created something and nobody seemed to really care, I made a Facebook post and I only got 3 acknowledgements from it. That's kind of disappointment. It's like we're already, forgetting who we are when we made it. You don't post anything without any other reason except because you felt like it. It was fun to post it,
Back in 1993, you're reminding me, there was this group called the Cacophony Society, and they may still be around. I don't know. I lost touch with all of that. But they had this event prior to this that was something called the Kill Your TV event.
Okay.
And they would get a television and they would do this kind of quasi-occult ritual around it and smash the TV and destroy it.
Okay.
And it was a big dramatic kind of thing that people joined in on. And it was done in somewhere up, I think up in Marin maybe.
Okay.
At the beach or something. But I believe they're connected to that very large event that happens every single year in the Black Rock Desert. The one that happens in August.
Ah, yes.
The one that, many, many, many people go to.
Yes.
They dress up and they create whole villages. It's like a self-sustaining little village or something.
Yeah.
And For me, it was 1993, and I was in the middle of Black Rock Desert, which I've never been to up to that point. I was probably, I don't know, 18 or 21, probably 18 actually, now that I think of it. And there were 300 of us. So there were 300 of us in the desert, dressed up with, very limited things, some tents and some trucks and so forth. There was one fellow that flew in on a little biplane.
Okay.
Another person that came in on a little helicopter or something, tiny one.
Yeah.
And there was this giant effigy of a human being. So for those who are in the know, of course, we are talking about the Burning Man Festival. And for those who don't know, we are still talking about the Burning Man Festival. But the Burning Man Festival is a gathering of people out in the middle of the desert. And there's a giant effigy of a human being kind of modeled after the ancient Celtic rituals that would happen.
I'm picturing the Wicker Man.
Yeah, just like the movie The Wicker Man.
Yeah.
They would have these big giant wicker men, and they would fill them with livestock and sometimes humans, and burn them and offer them to the gods. And that was when the going was tough. When the going was not so tough, they would just offer fruits and vegetables and, the fruits of the field, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, when I was there, I remember them doing so much. They made so much effort building and getting the details right, and it seemed like an awful lot of work. And then at the culmination of the ritual, of course, they set it ablaze.
Yeah.
And it is really beautiful, stark against the, purple cloak of night behind it, and, just the flickering faces of all of us dancing around the fire and, in awe. And then, of course, as it became a pile of dust, really ashes, slowly through the night, there were different phases. Music would change. At some point, we would leap over the flames, and that was kind of a big deal. There might have been some altered states involved,
perhaps
quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it felt as though time had... You'd gone back into some ancient time.
Yeah.
I mean, all around you is the Black Rock Desert, mountains in the distance. There's really not much other than this really profoundly theatrical experience. And it was hypnotic. It was deeply entrancing and powerful. But what I want to remark about is that in spite of all that energy, all that effort, they essentially, quote unquote, destroyed the very thing that they put so much effort in making.
Yeah.
It's almost like the point of it was to destroy it.
Yeah.
But if we switch that thinking around to the idea that we have from physics, of course you have the law of entropy, but then there's the other law that energy cannot be destroyed or created.
Yeah.
That it can only be transformed. So it can change shape, it can change qualities, it can separate, it can do all these different things. But you don't really destroy it. So maybe the energy that people were living off of that experience, the energy that I felt from that, wasn't that we were destroying something, is that we were watching a transformation, and that transformation that we were watching was deeply resonated with, so that we felt that we were resonating with that change. So as that happened, it was a magical act. We were doing this ritual. It had a symbolic importance to us. It was projected onto the experience. The experience happens, and of course, our consciousness changed right along at the same moment. So for me, that was a great example of the creative energy and how you don't really lose it. No matter whether you work really hard and you try your best and they reject it, or that partner that you'd like to have rejects you. Yeah. It's not really wasted. But one could be forgiven for thinking that, because that's a very common way of looking at it. But it doesn't really happen that way.
Yeah, like
the energy isn't wasted.
Right. The creative process is energizing. The creative process is relaxing. even when you're working hard at it, it's relaxing, you know, and the creative process is healing. I mean, just think about it. You cut your arm and you heal that cut by creating new tissue, right? So like creating is healing, right? And there are professions that do this on purpose. Art therapists, for example, understand that there is a healing quality in art that's worth harnessing, and you can study it and you can organize it and you can figure out what situations are more likely to enhance certain kinds of healing, you know, when you do art. And in my profession, occupational therapy, we use creativity all the time to create healing. And I like, you know, I love this description that you gave about the Burning Man festival, and they build this thing only to light it on fire and turn it to ash, right? And the process of doing it, as you just described, you know, was very much a healing process, among many other things. But one of those things is it's a healing process. And I know I've shared some of this research with you before, but you got me thinking about some interesting studies that have been done that I think, if you step back and look at it, they're really showing how creativity changes this manifested world that we live in. Okay, and so here's one. This is a very simple one. They took a bunch of elderly folks, and they had them sit in chairs and do knee extensions. Okay, knee exercises. Straighten your knee, put your knee back down. Straighten your knee. Okay, and we're gonna count them out. 1, 2, right up to, you know, however many they could do. And they were paying close attention to how many knee extensions these elderly folks could do on average. And they logged it. Then in the other group, and I forget, it's been so long, I don't know if they used a balloon or a ball or whatever it was, and they just had them kicking the ball or the balloon. So it's the same motion, right? It's still extension of the knee, still firing the quadriceps and, you know, and all that. And they found that when they're kicking the ball or kicking the balloon, they were quite literally able to do, like, I mean, I forget what the number was, but like 10 times as many knee extensions when they're kicking the ball as when we call it an exercise. Because, you know, when you call it an exercise, it's not creative, right? But when you're calling it a game, suddenly it's creative. And look what that did to their physiology. They had more endurance to keep going. They didn't fatigue, right? If that's not healing, then I don't know what is.
Yeah. It's really amazing, that difference between when their attention is on doing an exercise versus just having fun.
Just having fun. Yeah. Yeah.
That's such a difference.
Yeah. And there's another study where, again, you know, it's been a long time since I've read about these, so I might be missing a few pieces, but this is the gist of the study. Somehow they were like using, you know, some kind of EMG technology, and they're looking at like muscle fiber recruitment when people were doing different activities. And so one of the things they did is they would put a piece of paper on the table, and they would say, okay, we want you to take that piece of paper and wad it up into a ball, and then, you know, set it down. Okay, so then they would wad up the piece of paper, crumple it up like we've all done a bunch of times, and they'd set it down. And then they were looking at various patterns in how the muscle fibers were recruited. And then they had people take the piece of paper that they wadded into a ball, and they'd have them try to make a basket by throwing it in the trash. You know, try to make a basket. And they were looking at, you know, the muscle fiber recruitment, you know, from you know, shooting the basket. They're comparing all these different things, and they found something really, really, really interesting. Is when people knew that they were going to wad the piece of paper up and then eventually throw it into the basket, like they're going to try to make a basket, versus people that were just told to wad the paper up into a ball, they found, contrary to what they thought, they found that the muscle fiber recruitment was totally different in the crumpling process. Not only that, they found that the muscle fiber recruitment was different in the way they reached for the piece of paper to begin with.
Wow.
So if the person knew they're going to eventually throw the wadded piece of paper into the trash can like they're making a basket versus not knowing they're going to try to make a basket, it changed the way they even reached for the piece of paper.
That makes sense.
It makes sense in retrospect, doesn't it? Like when you look at it. It does. Yeah.
Because you'd want to be able to make something that you could comfortably throw, you could feel the shape of it, the weight of it, and that could seriously affect its flight through the air.
Yeah.
So you'd want to really get to know that paper before you threw it if you wanted to be very accurate.
Yeah, totally.
So that makes sense that you'd be doing some motor planning at a different level.
Different intent, right?
Yeah.
Because you're creating that wad of paper for a different purpose, right? But I thought it was interesting that it changed the muscle fiber recruitment even when they reached for the piece of paper before they even started the wadding up process, right?
Yes.
And it kind of gets me thinking, how different is it to recruit your muscle fibers when you're getting out of bed in the morning to go do something that you want to do versus getting up in the morning to go do something that you don't want to do?
Agreed.
Right? I've noticed I'm much more likely to feel back pain or hurt myself getting up in the morning if I know I have a very difficult day at work. But if I'm going to get up and go fishing, or if I'm going to get up and go meet my friends and go do something else that day, getting up in the morning is a different experience, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's worth learning how to be creative at times when we don't feel creative, because we want to use it to heal. We want to use it to change our physiology, to change the way our body behaves, So,
yeah, there are many ways to be creative. I find in the work that I do, there's so much creativity in it. Now I see that it's not just, technique or knowledge or something like that. You're actually creating. You're being thrown in a room with a variety of things, and you don't know what's going to be in that room. But there you are in the room with all those things. Now you're told, okay, what can you create with the things that are in the room? And it leaves it wide open. I mean, there are some limitations because it's different stuff each time. But when I have people who come to me privately for work, or if it's a group project, like I don't know, if I'm working for a company and I want to do a presentation or a training or something, each of those situations is kind of like having a set of items that I didn't know would be there until I got there. And I'm told, here, create something from this.
Yeah.
And when I run into challenges like questions that I don't know the answer to, it's still the same thing. I'm still having to decide whether whether I can focus so much on the question or I can focus on what the question does when I hear it.
Okay.
Because those are two different things. If I'm focusing too much on the question, there can be the possibility of feeling nervous, like, oh, what if I don't get the answer they need, or are they going to lose faith in what they're doing? Are they going to lose faith in themselves? Are they going to lose faith in me? But if I just become quiet and I allow the question to sink in, the question itself changes what I experience. I go into a state where I'm getting an imprint that's based on the shape of that question, if you will. And what it does inside of me then leads me to something, and I'm actually creating based upon that. So I remember those, I can't remember who the guy was, but he used to take drawings in, they would show Popeye cartoons, and then he would take...
Oh, yeah.
Tom Hatton? Tom Hatton.
Yeah, Tom Hatton. Popeye.
Yeah, and he would get a squiggle. And then he would take that squiggle and he would have to create one of the characters from it. And he did it every time.
I know. He blew me away every time he did that. Yeah.
That's kind of the situation that I'm in.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. No, that's great. That's great. I feel that way every time I teach a class.
Yeah.
Because the material is the material. You're not going to change the material that much, maybe a little bit, right? But there's always a perspective that arises that is the perspective of an expert. And good teaching is if you can notice that, oh, wow, I have an interesting perspective that would be very difficult for a novice to see. If I'm a good teacher, how can I get my students to see that same perspective I'm seeing so I can share it with them to go, hey, you see it that way? No, you don't see it yet? Okay, keep looking. And then kind of go, oh my God, I see it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whether it's like a strategy for answering a test question, you know, or how to see something the way a patient would interpret it, you know, something like that, right? And that's where the teaching becomes creative, or else it's just dispensing information. You know, they can just read the book themselves.
It's funny, you're talking about, you know, how the teacher would or the client would take it.
Yeah.
You're getting them to step into the second position.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, So we were talking about points of view and, you know, perceptual positions.
Yeah.
Is what we call it in NLP.
Which is a very creative thing to, if you know that concept exists, then you can start using it in different things in life. And it's amazing how much more creative you feel like you become when you do that.
I would say that if you're not doing that at all, I'm going to describe the process in a minute, but if you're not doing this at all in your life on a conscious level, you're missing out. You're missing out on a lot. You're missing out on the capacity to have better boundaries. You're missing out on the capacity to be fully present. You're missing out on the capacity to explore in a way that could bring you a lot of data that could help you solve problems. And it's just a good thing to know how to do. So I'm going to describe it because I think, you know, you can't make a few statements like that and not give the description. But so perceptual positions is kind of like when they talk about a voice, like first person voice, second person voice. It's similar to that in English. But we're really getting into the consciousness, sort of the psychology part of it. So in first position, this is a position where you are most fully associated into your perspective. So that is, to put another way, we're seeing out through our eyes. We're hearing what we're hearing from within our ears, right? We're feeling from within the body. That includes any kind of internal feeling, like a visceral movement of warmth or expansion, or metakinesthetic, like an emotion, or an actual, you know, tactile kinesthetic thing, like someone's touching you or something like that. So in the first position, if you are considering your own needs and your own experience, and let me change the word consider. If you're experiencing your own needs as tactile and real and in the present moment, you are fully in position number one. We use this a lot, and we see that people who do this only tend to be people like narcissists.
Yes, correct. Or
Like
or have no situational awareness.
No
right?
situational awareness. They miss really important details and cues around them.
Standing right at the entrance or the exit of a door at the grocery store, blocking everybody's way.
Right. Yeah. These people are not the best pet owners.
Correct. Yeah.
Because the ability to imagine what your dog is feeling in that moment.
Yeah.
Or to think about your lover or your family member or your friend's point of view, that's already beginning to go into position number two.
Number two, yeah, okay.
Because the second position, the second perceptual position, is a specific other that you're viewing their vantage point from. So that means you are seeing what they would see. In our example, you would be seeing me, right? So I would imagine I'm you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's weird. Seeing Carlos. Notice the pronoun switch, because he is the one talking, but I am the one experiencing it through you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah,
you is
yeah.
actually me.
Right.
It gets a little confusing because the pronoun usage is what supports the concentration, in my opinion. So if you don't use the right language, it pulls you slightly out of that experience.
Okay.
So when you're in first position, it's I. When you're in the second position, it starts when you start saying you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when you actually switch to that second position, your you is referring to the person you once were a moment ago. Your original body.
Yeah, you're once removed
You're once removed
from yourself.
And so when I have people do this in the office, when they're describing things, they'll say he or say your first name. Don't say I. Just skip saying I.
Yeah.
And it does help them to stay focused. Because what will happen is otherwise they'll slide in and out of that position because it's kind of hard to maintain.
Yeah.
But it's such a good thing. You want to learn how to switch on your empathy when you need to feel into what another person might be feeling. Then imagine you are that other person, seeing, hearing, and feeling what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And just do that as often as you can.
Yeah.
This is really, really great when you want to be considerate, but it's terrible if you have no boundaries, right? So if you have a person who accidentally slips into a second position, it's not intentional.
Mm-hmm.
These are the kinds of people who are overly worried and checking all the time whether they're okay. Am I okay?
Yeah.
They're not in their full first position. They're sliding out accidentally and considering other people's points of view.
That's a good point. That's interesting. Yeah.
And it really shouldn't matter, right?
Yeah.
If you're secure and safe in yourself.
Yeah.
But when you want to view another point of view, let's say you had a conflict. Or let's say it's not a conflict, but you just want to avoid one.
Okay.
You can imagine being that other person and run through what it would be like. Rehearse hearing it as if you were saying it, but you're on their end receiving it.
Yeah.
You can learn so much from that about past arguments that you've had. You want to figure out, why did they freak out like that? Run the entire thing over again from their point of view.
Yeah.
See what you can discover. Because the third position is like a position where you could see both of you. You're a bystander and you are removed once again from yourself, so you're even more dissociated. Now, here's the trick to that one. When you're doing this, you have to imagine that you're equidistant. At least if you're trying to have control over your level of insight. Now, you can choose to be closer or farther away as you see fit, but the key is to make sure that you can consciously be equidistant, no matter whether you're on your left side or the right side or above or below.
Okay.
You emotionally are so far removed from yourself that it should be easy and no-brainer for you to say, oh, well, I don't feel anything more for one than the other. They're equal. I'm simply witnessing. This is the position of a witness, right? I'm witnessing what took place, witnessing what words were said. I'm listening to the tone. I'm listening to the volume, the rhythm, the timbre. I'm watching and I'm noticing facial expressions, skin coloration, gestures, distances between them. And I'm not really focused in on the kinesthetic part. There might be an auditory digital part, in other words, the inner voice, the critical analysis part.
Yeah.
There may be those kinds of observations, neutral observations about things.
But less body feelings.
Less body feelings, more spatial distances and timing sequences.
Yeah.
And then there's a position that's further out than that, which we sometimes call position number 4. And that is like the ability to see yourself, seeing yourself. And as you see yourself seeing yourself, you might assist that by seeing it from the ceiling so that you can see that there's more than just that event. There's a whole lot of other things out there. Because the key to the 4th position, in my opinion, in my experience really, is that It's your capacity to connect to everything else that is not that. So it's really important that you get good at going into that meta position.
Okay.
Really meta. What's the big picture here?
Yeah.
And big picture thinking is what sometimes people think of as wise thinking. Like, so you want a flash of insight or wisdom, think big picture. How does this relate ecologically to everything else? And who am I when I'm in this position where I can actually witness that?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you successfully do that, you will notice that it's a different level of functioning. It's a different state.
Yeah.
And of course, you're even more removed. So can you think of something where that would be really, really useful to be that removed from and still observed?
Mm-hmm.
What about trauma?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
sometimes being a third person isn't far enough. For whatever reason, that trauma is like this unprocessed experience that a person needs to be in a fourth position to be able to even acknowledge, because it's just too much.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really useful.
Yeah.
Plus, it allows you to tap into the kinds of quantum leaps of understanding that can really only happen when you go meta like that. Now, if you practice going into, fully into your first position, being totally present and mindful, fully associated, dissociating and reassociating into another person, position number 2, and then dissociating from position number 2 and being in position number 3, a neutral witness, observing, and then dissociating from position number 3 into position 4, which is everything else that is not that, and includes so much more. And you could decide that from that place, I'm going to take everything that I'm learning from this position, and I'm going to bring it with me as I go into the third, into the second, and then back into the first. You've just created a line of connection for information to flow into your present awareness. And most people who do this exercise and actually take their time to do it report back to me, wow, that changed everything about how I experienced that.
Yeah.
And I no longer feel a conflict, and I now understand why it happened, and now I feel differently about it. Mm-hmm. So it really does change your brain.
Yeah, it does.
Changes your whole way of thinking.
As you were describing this, especially when you got towards the end, about a third position and then like, I guess a fourth position, which is sort of like everything that's not that, right? That really got me picturing hive mentality, right? There's an individual bee, and there are a few other bees around the bee that see the bee. But then there's this collective consciousness of the entire hive, right? And what's powerful, the bee or the hive? It's the hive is powerful. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, sure. And the individual bee has the power of the hive when it's connected to the power of the hive. And that's what I love. It's, first of all, this is a creative way of seeing ourselves and our situations and everything that we're around.
We are the Borg. Resistance is futile.
Yes.
Your uniqueness shall be added to our own.
Yes.
We are the Borg. Resistance is futile.
Right. The strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. You know what I mean? Yeah. I love it. I love it. It's such a cool and powerful way of doing it. And you and I have... I just sort of naturally absorbed some of this from a lot of the work that you and I have done and the conversations that we have and all of that. But this is something that I do a lot, and it's something that I even I'll even find myself assisting other people to do it just in the way I structure a sentence. Maybe there's some tension between me and a client or a student, right? And by suddenly thinking of me, them, the whole situation, the entire medical field, the entire educational field, right? Boom, 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 boom. You're already there, and it doesn't take very much practice. Just a little bit of practice to start getting good at pushing your perspective out farther and farther and farther. Then suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, Here's a solution. There's something I could propose. This is a question I could ask that might get them to think about something else that might cause them to pose a solution that I'm not thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that sounds a little crazy what I just said. But when you have the whole hive working on a problem, it's only inevitable that you're going to get all these different ideas and all these different perspectives in how to solve the problem.
We need to access the hive mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's true. What, if not hive mind, is ecological thinking, right? You're thinking of systems working within systems, and how it all affects each other, how they're all interrelated. So yeah, and you're right. It isn't that hard if you practice it. That's why I say, like, this is one of those hacks that, you don't have to be a master of, NLP or hypnosis or meditation or any of that stuff to practice this technique. You can get really good at it with, very little in the way of repetition. I mean, you practice this, 10 or 20 times and you're like good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it makes sense that you do it. In fact, I think that along with teaching the voices in grade school, they should have kids learn this more as an exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about what happens when a kid, steals the ball.
Yeah.
And then ruins it for the other kids. Obviously, they're not thinking about position number 2.
Yeah.
And they're definitely not thinking about position number 3. And they're probably not thinking about position 4 either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
totally.
If you're going to ask if you're going to check ecology, it means in NLP, when you say check ecology, you mean to say that you should ask yourself, how is this change or decision going to affect my body, myself, my relationships at home, like my family, my friendships, my position at work, my ability to produce income, my position on this planet as a human being in relation to all the other living things. So ecology check is one of the safeguards when it comes to knowledge and decision-making and empowerment. Because as you gain power, if you don't want to harm and create wounds and unnecessary damage, then you have to check ecology before you do anything.
Yeah. I love that.
It's the same if you're being creative.
Yeah, yeah. And that is a creative process of seeing where you fit into everything. We're talking about hive mentality. Mm-hmm. The Stoic philosophers, right, would say what harms the hive harms the bee.
Yeah.
And you steal something from society, you have actually harmed the hive, which harms the individual bee, which harms you. Mm-hmm. And it takes some it's not that advanced, but it takes just a little bit of advanced thinking to see that, And what's funny is some cultures are going to, I would say it this way. Each culture has their skill at seeing a piece of the hive, at seeing the entire ecology, right? One of the things that happens in our culture here in the United States, especially Southern California, right, is we are very good at individualism. And that's something that we need to be able to see. The hive needs to see that there are individual bees. That's part of being creative too. Yeah. And then the bee needs to see the entire hive, and that's also creativity. You know what I mean? It always amazes me when I meet somebody from a different place, or when I was younger and I traveled and went to different places. Some of the things that blew my mind I went all my life and I never realized this concept or realized this thing, and it was sitting there the whole time, right? Because I never saw it. Because I just needed a completely different perspective to see something, like opening a banana from the other end, from the way that we do it here in California. Yeah. We open the difficult end of the banana. And in other cultures, they open the easy end of the banana. I'm like, you can open a banana from the other end. Yeah. It's like, well, how smart is that?
Yep.
It's just funny how that works,
Well, yeah. Opening it up from a different end, as you open up that peel, think about some experience that you had that was less than positive.
Okay.
When you change perceptual positions, you're opening that banana peel from the other end.
Yeah.
You're seeing that you can get to it differently.
Yeah.
And we all have the capacity to have a visceral experience, a reaction to anything that is really uncomfortable, anything we have an aversion to.
Mm-hmm.
If it was something really, really tragic and traumatic, or just something that you really didn't like, you still have a kind of an encoded experience that is that thing.
Yeah.
And if you were to imagine going to re-experience that or to recall those events, there may be a part of you that recoils at the thought of that. No, I don't want to remember. No, I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
Or you'll skip past certain things. You'll avoid going there. And that's because there is a visceral encoded reaction that's associated with that thing. And you can see people moving, like gesticulating with their body, or tightening up, or becoming asymmetrical, or turning their body, or wincing their face when you see them going through that.
Yeah.
And it's something you can witness just in general out in life. Sometimes you're having a conversation with someone and you ask them a question and they don't filter that question the normal way, like by avoiding it. Maybe they go there mentally and suddenly you see them react that way. And that's a person who hasn't realized how to take control of those boundaries. But with the skill that is gained from doing the perceptual positions exercise, you can start to learn how to feel where those boundaries are. Where is that line? How close can you view that event before it feels unbearable? And if you were to wind back a little bit, like, pan back with the camera, is there a place that looks like a safe distance? By safe distance, meaning you're not getting a strong visceral discomfort moving through your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just doing that exercise alone, by changing those distances, people can discover that they do have some control over how they feel. Mm-hmm. That they're not controlled by everything. Like every one of the experiences they've had has happened to them, and it doesn't feel like that anymore. They start to feel like, no, it's not happening to me. I can control how this movie in my mind is playing. I'm the director of this film.
Yeah, yeah.
So now I can use this, and maybe from one angle, I might see the distance between me and that terrible thing. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, okay, well, this is a safe distance. Now I know I can be, within 40 feet or 100 feet of this thing. What I'll do is I'll say, okay, well, then change to the other side.
Okay.
And imagine the reverse image. So you're on the other side of that experience. How close can you get to it there?
Okay.
And once you know what that is, you just say, well, what's the difference between this place and that place? Is there anything different about it? And naturally, the answer has to be yes.
Yeah.
How could it be the same? You're not on the same side.
Yeah. That is so creative.
The orientation is different.
Yeah.
So you may not necessarily know what to say, how to describe the difference. But you can certainly, your nervous system knows it's different. Otherwise, you wouldn't be standing on the opposite side.
As you were describing this, I was just thinking of a particular time in my life when I was going to college to study acupuncture. Mm-hmm. And I realize I do have certain angles in which I picture the school and the people walking in and out of the building. And I realized, wait a minute, what if I experienced my entire education there from some outside top corner of the outside of the building and watched the entire, 3 years go by from up there?
Yes.
That feels very different. Very, 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 very different.
Well, if awareness is the word that we use to describe our capacity to witness experiences, and awareness is wherever your attention is at that moment, does the other aspects that you're not detecting in that moment, does it still exist? It's kind of like the thing we were saying earlier about the flower and the trees and the forest.
Yeah.
If they're not appreciated.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, when I hear that question, I think, well, yeah, of course it is. I'm just not paying attention to it.
Yeah.
It exists.
Yeah.
But if I'm not paying attention to it, that means there's some awareness that I'm not aware of that's happening. In other words, there's a shape to what it is that is my attention. If I were to really concentrate it, when I say I, me saying I am happy. Well, there's the feeling happy. Then there's the I, which is, my individual consciousness, which is doing that happiness, right? Happy is a state, right? But the state is consisting of a doing. It's a process that I'm doing. So who is the driver of that action? That's I. How do I know what is I and what is not I?
Yeah.
So we're talking about hive mind, right?
Yeah.
So there's I and then there's not I. That would include everything that's not just I.
Yeah.
So then if I even have a concept of the not I and I have a concept of the I, that means my consciousness is partly in the not I already.
Yeah. There's got to be some of it there at least.
Right.
Right.
At some level. So, follow with me for a moment, because if you were to then really get a sense of a description of what the eye shape felt like where are you, what's the shape of the eye? What does it feel like the shape of the eye is? Then you could tune into what that feels like viscerally. Like for me, I would say, okay, at the moment, as I say I, we're always talking about the moment right now, whenever you ask the question.
Yeah.
I'm sensing the eye is a little bit to the left and inside my head. It's kind of like a not so clear, blotchy shape. I can picture it in my mind. And it goes down behind the back of my neck, and it goes, but inside still. It goes down behind the chest and is kind of like centered in the core of my body.
Right. And that's like you're describing your kinesthetic feeling of the shape and location of this thing that you call
kinesthetic
eye.
And visual sense.
Yeah.
And I could go into more description. I could say, that there was certain sets of colors I was seeing when I was there. There was a density that I could describe, a temperature. I could get into that description. But at the end of the day, where was I observing that from? If I could see the shape, from which vantage point was I seeing that shape that I just described? That's yet another I, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking, about something that's related to wholeness work. It's another development from Connie Ray Andreas. She's a famous NLP practitioner, brilliant woman. But she describes this wholeness process as partly the identification of these awarenesses of the I, these various eyes, and the integration with the larger whole. It's a beautiful and powerful experience of oneness. Because if you were to, create this association from I to I to I to I, you can eventually run out of any eyes. And you can ask that you just allow yourself to become everything that is this other I and this other I and this other I and this other I until, ad infinitum, until you just become in and through yourself, through the body and all around the body and beyond the body, and expand it into everything that is. And at some point, it ceases to have any words. It ceases to have any pictures. It ceases to have anything other than a oneness experience. I would describe that as like a blissful peace that is expanded and still.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like to me.
I was trying to do it as you were describing it, and I actually reached a point where I got a shiver down my spine.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh my, wow, So
it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, that really is.
I mean, I think it's kind of like connected to the perceptual positions because you have to know that that's possible.
Yeah.
In order to do the integration of yourself, right? These higher levels of self.
This is a
core
good
self.
I was going to say, this is a good time to kind of come full circle. Mm-hmm. This is a good time to come full circle. Mm. We were talking about where does creativity come from? It comes from there.
Yeah.
Right? Like you keep going back through those eyes, and you almost just become this, whatever this is thing, right? And it's like, that's where it comes from. So how could you not be creative if all that just comes right back into this present moment looking out your own eyes? Right? You have all that created all this.
Right.
Is going to go into whatever this poem is you're going to write, or whatever this work idea is, whatever this PowerPoint is going to be. You know, seems so small and easy to tackle that way.
It does.
Yeah. What am I going to squeeze into my drink? What am I going to cook for dinner tonight?
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. My name is Oliver Althoen. I produced the show, and I also wrote our theme song, which you're listening to right now. Please connect with us on social media, and you can find our website at authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.